What's up guys, Jake here. So, welcome to my new series, History of Gender. I'm going to be covering all kinds of topics relating to gender and the long journey that these words have taken over time. I'm going to be educating whilst providing the historical context for a lot of these words. This episode we're focusing on the linguistic and contextual evolutions of sex versus gender. Let's get to it. In 1955, a gender theorist called John Money distinguished the difference between gender and sex as the difference between your biology and your identity. This was at a time when sex was a word that was used to refer to someone as being either male or female, when we would now refer to that as someone's gender. But that meaning didn't become widespread until the 1970s with the help of feminist movements. He also coined the term gender role, which has had a massive effect on gender theory over the years. The term gender role is actually defined as actions or responses that may reveal someone's status, their clothing, speech patterns, movements, and other factors that are not limited to biological sex. Which basically means a person's actions and their looks may indicate their biology based on society's expectations of these actions. And that has created a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, in the way that you're expected to look and behave a certain way based on your biology, so you're conditioned to look and behave a certain way because of your biology. In 1978, a feminist paper on trans people outlined a trichotomy between your biological sex, your psychological gender, and your gender role. This movement allowed us to start separating out sex and gender in a comprehensive way. It draws a difference between your biological sex, which is down to your chromosomes, which is internal, our psychological gender, which is an idea and feeling of our gender that we have in our brains, which again is internal, and our social gender role, which referred to society's expectations of our gender determined by our sex, and how we perform our psychological gender in accordance with this gender role, which is external. Now, I know that's a lot to break down, but that is the starting point to how we now dissect gender these days. We can understand that our gender is not down to one factor or caused by one thing, but rather a complex makeup of our brain and our biology interacting with the world around us, forming around our beliefs, our personality traits, and our interests. In the 1980s, gender was used instead of sex to refer to the biological sex of animals in research. But it was found to be complicated to use those two words interchangeably, so most scientific fields have stopped doing that. And this marks a progression of scientists understanding that sex and gender aren't the same. They interact with the social theory that gender is a complex identity, and sex is measured on a more simplistic biological scale. But this simplistic biological scale is still trying to play catch-up to intersex bodies, in the sense that sex is measured on a scale between male and female, and science tries to class intersex people as closer to an end of this scale, rather than being on a spectrum that doesn't have to classify somebody on a birth certificate as M or F. And this is another intersection between biology and sociology's views on sex and gender. These days, sex and gender are still used interchangeably in some social contexts. Mostly when referring to biological sex, people use gender, which stems from the belief that sex and gender are the same or consistently linked. Now, this occurs socially and not so much academically due to the lack of understanding on the difference between the two. For example, when somebody asks what gender someone is because they can't pinpoint a binary identity by their expression, they can often be referring to what gender that person was born as. What they're asking is what's in their pants, and not what a person identifies their gender as. This is showing that socially a lot of people don't know how to ask the difference between someone's sex and someone's gender. Where it's inappropriate to ask about someone's sex, it can be appropriate to ask about someone's gender. A lot of the time when people are asking about someone's gender, they're asking because they want to be respectful of that gender and not make an assumption about how they identify. Now, this is a direct quote from US Supreme Court Judge, I hope I'm saying it right, Antonin Scalia, who had some interesting ideas about the difference between gender and sex. The word gender has acquired the new and useful connotation of cultural or attitudinal characteristics, as opposed to physical characteristics, distinctive to the sexes. That is to say, gender is to sex as feminine is to female and masculine is to male. Now, take from that what you will, but I believe what they're getting at here is the core idea that gender has evolved to refer to a set of cultural ideas and behaviours that exist outside of someone's biology. And gender is masculine and feminine, whereas sex is male and female. Now, aside from this being a very binary take on gender, it's interesting to see the progression of language and how two words that can mean almost the same thing, female and feminine, is used to class the ideas of gender and sex in entirely different ways, which it should be. Now, to get up to date on current gender theory, let's do a breakdown of gender and sex. Sex is biological. Gender is what you become socially. Gender identity is your own sense or conviction of gender. Gender roles are the cultural stereotypes of gender. And gender expression or presentation is how you outwardly display your gender identity. So, to wrap up, I know that's a lot to digest, but the evolution of words that we use in our community are really important, and it's really key to having a deeper understanding of what gender and sex means. And it provides important context on how we label ourselves today. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications if you want to know when I'm going to make another video like this. See you next week. Peace out, bitches.